Hi, I'm Esther. Last Thanksgiving, my parents invited me home with a smile so sweet it felt rehearsed. They said it was about family, about forgiveness. But at that table, beneath the clinking glasses and polite laughter, they demanded I hand my sister the $120,000 my grandfather left me. Money he'd whispered was mine alone. When I refused, their masks slipped. They didn't just want the inheritance. They wanted to erase me. What would you do if the people who raised you tried to turn gratitude into a trap? The late afternoon sun in San Jose painted everything gold. Through my kitchen window, I watched the neighborhood shimmer under leaves that clung to the last of fall. My apartment was small but warm, string lights over the window, a thrift store table covered with a faded tablecloth, a few paper turkeys taped to the fridge for Azure. I'd been boiling sweet potatoes for a pie when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen for months. Sierra. My mother's voice poured through the speaker like syrup, too sweet, too practiced. Esther, honey, we've been talking, and we'd love for you and Azure to join us for Thanksgiving at the house. Everyone will be there. It wouldn't be the same without you. I leaned against the counter, staring at the bubbles rising in the pot. Her tone was out of character. In my family, kindness often meant a hook was already baited. You're inviting me? My voice came out flatter than I intended. Of course. Family is family. You'll see. Things are different now. We've all missed you. Azure padded into the kitchen, hair still damp from her shower, wearing the sweatshirt she'd painted at camp. Grandma? She whispered, eyes wide. I handed her the phone, and she lit up as Kiara's voice poured through. They spoke about pies and hugs and how tall you must have grown. When she handed the phone back, she said, Mom, can we go? Please, it's Thanksgiving. I dried my hands on a towel. Memories flickered. Holiday dinners where I'd been placed at the end of the table, the awkward silence when my father toasted his girls, but only looked at Calantha, my sister. Azure had never seen that side. She still believed in grandparents who told bedtime stories and remembered birthdays. All right, I said. We'll go, but just for dinner. Her arms wrapped around my waist. Thank you. Maybe it'll be better this time. I wished I believed her. Thanksgiving Day arrived with that damp chill unique to the Bay Area hills. We drove past orchards and tech campuses until the freeway wound into Los Gatos. The Harper estate stood above the town like a set piece from another era. White columns, sprawling lawns, and a driveway lined with cars too new and shiny to belong to a family in trouble. I parked near the edge, taking a breath before stepping out. Azure ran ahead, her small boots crunching leaves. I followed, slower, my palms slick against the steering wheel. The door opened before we could knock. Sierra appeared in a cream sweater, pearls at her neck, arms spread wide. Look at you two, she exclaimed. Azure, come give Grandma a hug. Azure obliged, wrapping her arms around her. Behind Sierra, Clive gave a polite nod, then Calantha glided into view, hair in a sleek twist, dress expensive enough to pay a month's rent. She smiled too brightly. Esther, you look wonderful. That color suits you. Compliments from Calantha were rare and rarely genuine. I thanked her anyway, stepping inside. The house smelled of rosemary, cinnamon, and the faint tang of polished wood. Photographs lined the hallway, but only one included me, my graduation picture tucked behind a vase. Azure darted off to find the family dog. I trailed into the dining room. The table stretched almost the entire length of the room, candles flickering in crystal holders. Silverware glinted under a chandelier. It looked like a magazine spread, except for the undercurrent of something rehearsed. Dinner began with light conversation. Kiara reminisced about old holidays, calling them our golden years. Calantha chimed in with anecdotes about her charity work. Clive mostly nodded. I kept my eyes on my plate, answering when spoken to, watching Azure giggle with her cousin at the far end. Then Sierra stood, lifting her glass. Before we eat dessert, I'd like to say something. Her voice grew softer, almost reverent. Thanksgiving is about giving and forgiving. She paused, letting the words settle. This family has been through challenges, but we always find our way back. People murmured agreement. I waited. She went on. We've all sacrificed for each other, some of us more than others, and we're blessed because of it. Blessed with health, opportunities, and, her eyes flicked to me, security. The room cooled. I felt the shift like a draft under a door. Calantha added with a sweet smile. And sometimes, sharing blessings is the best way to show love. Azure's fork clinked against her plate. She didn't understand the undertone, but I did. Kiara continued. Your grandfather left a legacy meant to bring this family closer, not tear it apart. Isn't it time we make things right? She looked at Calantha, then back at me. The words weren't a request. They were a prelude. It's not about money, Calantha said softly, almost rehearsed. It's about fairness. The table fell quiet. My pulse picked up. I glanced at Azure, who was happily spooning pumpkin pie into her mouth, unaware of the trap forming around her mother. I lifted my glass, meeting Kiara's gaze. To family, I said. My voice was calm, but inside, every warning bell rang. Her smile sharpened. She leaned in, lowering her voice so only I could hear. We knew you'd do the right thing. I woke before dawn, not from rest, but from tension. My body might have been still, but my mind had paced all night, wandering through old conversations, memories that burned like cold metal. The silence in the house was too deliberate, like it had been scrubbed clean of comfort. Even the walls seemed to echo with unsaid things. Azure, my daughter, was still asleep, her breath slow and rhythmic, unaware of the undercurrents around her. Her sketch pad lay face down on the guest bed, its edges sticking out from under the covers, crayon marks smeared across the sheets. She had drawn something last night. A house, I think. Maybe us in it. Maybe the version of a family she wished she had. I watched her a moment longer before I carefully peeled myself from the bed and slipped into the hall. Downstairs, I heard voices. Muffled, familiar. Sierra, my mother, and Calantha, my sister. Their tones weren't raised, but something in the rhythm made me pause at the top of the stairs. There was strategy in their cadence. This wasn't just small talk. This was planning, calculating, always in whispers, always behind doors. I moved slowly down the steps, my feet bare against the cold wood. The scent of coffee wafted up from the kitchen, but it didn't feel like comfort. It felt like a lure, a ritual performed out of habit, not warmth. In the kitchen, early sunlight slipped through the blinds, striping the countertops in pale gold. The stainless steel appliances gleamed too perfectly, like a showroom, untouched, unlived in. On the island counter sat half a loaf of bread and an untouched pot of coffee. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. The whispers had stopped. Mom? Cal? I said, voice low. No response, just the soft shuffle of movement beyond the doorway, then silence. Later, we gathered in the dining room for leftovers. The heavy aroma of turkey and cranberry sauce hung in the air, but the warmth that should have accompanied it was absent. Azure sat on one of the tall chairs, humming softly to herself, focused on her plate. She spooned stuffing into her mouth like nothing was wrong, like she couldn't feel the frost beneath the smiles. I took my place at the head of the table, not out of dominance, but tradition. It was the seat I used to take when I was 10, when things felt simpler, safer. Kiara placed a cloth napkin in my lap with theatrical grace. Her smile was brittle, practiced. She glanced at Calantha, who sat directly across from me. They exchanged a look, a silent exchange, laced with intent. Then Calantha spoke, and the entire room tilted. Esther, she began, her voice too bright, too rehearsed. Have you thought about how we'll divide the $120,000 from grandfather? Just like that, no lead-up, no easing in. A bomb, dropped with precision. My hands froze around my coffee mug. And the steam swirled upward, brushing my cheek like a warning. I could feel Azure's attention shift. The spoon paused halfway to her lips. Sierra chimed in, her tone dripping with faux concern. Your sister only wants her fair share, she said, stressing the word fair like it was some kind of weapon. I met their eyes, both of them. Their gazes were expectant, calculating. I took a breath and let it sit in my chest before I answered. The will was clear, I said quietly, but with all the strength I could muster. That money was mine. Grandfather left it to me. Calantha let out a disbelieving laugh. After everything Mom and Dad have done for you, she scoffed, that money should help Azure too. I mean, I have kids and expenses. There it was, the implication, that I was selfish, that I was taking something I didn't deserve, that I was somehow lesser for not folding under guilt. I opened my mouth, but before I could respond, Sierra slammed her napkin on the table. The sound cracked like a whip. You've always been ungrateful, she hissed. And your daughter? She's turning into a freeloader just like you. The word stung more than I expected. Freeloader, as if I hadn't fought for every inch of stability, as if I hadn't clawed my way through sleepless nights, solo parenthood, anxiety so deep it left bruises on my thoughts. Calantha leaned back with folded arms. You act like a victim, she said coolly. But you're living off the rest of us. Clive, Sierra's second husband, silent until now, finally spoke, his voice devoid of inflection. It's just money, Esther. Don't be so dramatic. Azure's spoon clattered against her plate. I looked at her, her face flushed, lip trembling, tears welling like floodgates about to break. She dropped her spoon, and her tiny voice broke my heart. Why do they talk to you like that? She asked me. I stood immediately, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. Because they think they can, I said. My voice steadied, though inside I felt like shattering. I started clearing the plates, one by one, with deliberate calm, not as a servant, but as a woman reclaiming her presence. The dishes clinked, echoing in the silence. Nobody offered to help. Not one of them moved. I turned to Azure. We're leaving soon. She nodded, her eyes still glassy. I held her hand and led her toward the front door. At the threshold, I turned one last time. Sierra's eyes met mine, cold, unreadable. Calantha didn't even try to mask her satisfaction. Clive avoided my gaze. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. We stepped into the morning. The cold hit like truth, bracing, unforgiving, honest. In the car, Azure sobbed quietly. I kept my hand over hers, warmth in the aftermath. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, smaller than usual, but not broken. They want a war? I whispered, almost to myself. Then let's start by remembering exactly how it all began. The car door clicked shut with a soft finality. I glanced at Azure in the passenger seat, her head tilted slightly against the window, her breath fogging the glass. The storm had passed, but the street still shimmered with rain, reflecting orange halos from the streetlights above. We walked quietly into the hotel, shoes squeaking faintly against the marble floor. The modest room welcomed us with stillness. I flicked on the small lamp near the bed, its amber glow casting soft shadows on the walls. Azure didn't speak. She simply walked over to the small desk, pulled out her sketchpad from her backpack, and began to draw. It was always the same rhythm, her way of coping, of sorting the world when it got too loud or too unfair. I sat at the edge of the bed, watching her in silence. My daughter's pencil scratched across the page with careful precision. Her brows were furrowed in quiet focus. Slowly, the drawing came into view, a bare tree stretching its arms to the sky, thin branches gnarled like weathered hands. Beneath it stood a single figure, small, alone. My chest tightened. Even without words, the meaning was clear. She had drawn herself, isolated. No one else stood beneath that tree with her. My daughter, who should have been surrounded by warmth and unconditional love, had learned to draw herself as a solitary soul. The quiet weighed on me, not just tonight's silence, but years of it. The silence I had accepted when they erased me bit by bit. The smiles they withheld, the holidays I was conveniently forgotten from, the twisted narratives that painted me ungrateful or selfish whenever I asked for fairness. They rewrote the story with me as the villain, and for years I let them. "Mommy," Azure said softly, looking up from the page. Her voice barely rose above the hum of the air conditioner. "Who's under the tree with me?" I hesitated. My throat clenched. And then I forced my voice out gently. "You're under it with me." Her eyes searched mine. Then, satisfied, she nodded. She placed her pencil down, crawled under the covers, and turned away, curling into herself. I stood and moved to the window. Outside, the hills in the distance blinked with scattered lights, like tiny stars on Earth. Somewhere out there, my family, my so-called family, was probably sleeping soundly in the illusion of victory, unaware of the tide that had begun to shift. As I watched the horizon, the past crept back like an unwelcome visitor. I was 23 again. That year, Grandpa had passed away. He was the only one in the family who ever looked at me without that cold flicker of comparison in his eyes. He loved us all, but he saw me, the real me. On the night before the memorial service, he called me into his study. He seemed frail, but alert, eyes sharp as always. He handed me an envelope. "For your future," he said quietly. Not theirs. Inside was a simple handwritten letter and a check, one with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. I was stunned, even frightened. But it was the note that stayed with me. "Use this wisely. This is yours." That moment burned into my memory, not because of the money, but because he trusted me. Weeks later, the betrayal arrived. I was summoned to the dining room. Papers were spread across the table, their language dense and official. There was no lawyer, just Kiera, sitting with that practiced, polished smile, and Calantha, hovering like a silent enforcer. "We're just simplifying things," Kiera cooed, as if I were a child. "It's easier this way, for all of us." I stared at the papers, legalese tangled around vague promises and veiled threats. There was no space to ask questions, no room for hesitation. I felt the pressure of their eyes on me, their expectation that I would fall in line, like always. I signed. And in doing so, I disappeared, at least from the version of the family they were constructing. Now, years later, the memory didn't come with sadness. It came with clarity. I had been quiet for too long, loyal for too long, guilty for too long. A whisper broke through the memory. "Mommy?" I turned. Azure stood beside the bed, her small form trembling slightly. Her face was pale in the dim light. I opened my arms. She rushed in and held me tightly, as if afraid I might slip away. "They're mean to you, Mommy," she said, voice quivering. "But I won't be." My breath caught. I wrapped my arms around her and pressed my cheek to her hair. "You're the only truth I've ever had," I whispered. That moment anchored me. After she fell asleep again, I opened my suitcase and pulled out my laptop. The keys clicked louder than I remembered. I logged into my old email, one I rarely used anymore. My hands trembled slightly as I searched for the thread. There it was. An old conversation with the notary, and then the attachment. I clicked. There it was, the original will. Grandpa's signature, the seal, the date. My name was right there, printed clearly, sole heir. There was no mention of Sierra, no division, no asterisks. My hands shook as I printed the file on the hotel's tiny printer. I watched the pages slide out, each one a quiet scream of truth finally given breath. I stared at them, feeling both terrified and empowered. It was never about the money. This was about what they tried to take from me. My identity, my story, my place. They reduced my worth to silence and expected me to accept it. I wouldn't anymore. I opened a new blank document on the laptop. My fingers hovered. Then slowly, steadily, I began to type. My voice would not be borrowed again. I looked over at Azure's sketchpad. The drawing had changed. Now, two figures stood under the tree, still bare, still lonely, but not alone anymore. She had drawn me beside her. And we were no longer forgotten, we were beginning again. And this time, we were telling our own story. The early morning light filtered gently through the linen curtains, casting long, golden lines across the hardwood floor. I sat in the dim glow of my laptop screen, the silence of the house surrounding me like a heavy fog. My eyes were dry and burning, but I couldn't stop staring at the words I had typed late into the night. "They think I won't fight." I pressed save, the faint click of the trackpad echoing louder than it should have. The words felt like a lifeline, both a declaration and a reminder of who I had to be, now more than ever. Behind me, I heard the soft creak of footsteps. I turned slightly to see Azure standing in the doorway, hugging her tablet to her chest. Her eyes were still drowsy, her hair a gentle mess. She looked like a child, too wise for her years. "Mom," she said in a whisper, "are you okay?" I offered a tired smile, masking the storm that had been gathering inside me for days. "I'm all right, honey." "Just thinking." She nodded slowly and walked over, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. I hugged her back, silently grateful for her grounding presence. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sierra. "We'd like to meet today, just to talk." Calmly. There was something ominously gentle in that phrasing. Just to talk, the kind of phrase you'd hear before a scripted ambush. I stared at the text for a long moment before replying with 3 simple words. "I'll be there." The drive to Los Gatos was quiet. The road wound through old orchards and golden hills, places Kiara used to take me when I was Azure's age. Funny how even the most beautiful memories can curdle when you realize they were made by someone who saw you as disposable. Azure sat silently beside me, her fingers tracing shapes on her tablet screen. I caught her glancing at me, reading my expressions the way a soldier reads enemy movements. She was bracing too. When we pulled into the Harper estate, I immediately noticed how sterile everything felt. The grandness of the place, the wrought iron gate, the sculpted hedges, the crisp flag snapping in the breeze, was meant to impress. But to me, it felt like a museum exhibit of a family long extinct. Sierra greeted us at the door, her smile soft, her tone perfectly measured. "Thank you for coming," she said, like a hostess welcoming a guest to afternoon tea rather than a woman orchestrating her sister's erasure. Clive followed close behind, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. And then there was Calantha, lingering just behind them, her posture too rehearsed, her face glowing with curated innocence. We were led to the sitting room, where autumnal wreaths adorned the windows and the scent of cinnamon clung to the air. There were pastries and coffee laid out with surgical precision. The room screamed warmth, but the people inside were ice. Azure tugged at my hand, and we settled onto the couch. Sierra poured coffee, setting delicate cups before us like we were at a peace summit. Then she began. "Esther," she said, her voice wrapped in velvet, "you've always been the strong one. You've held us together more times than I can count, and that's why I wanted today to be calm, respectful." I said nothing, just stared at her over the rim of my cup. "We want unity, Esther," she continued, "not legal wars. Family isn't about documents. It's about duty. It's about love and memory." She looked at me with glossy, imploring eyes. "Give Calantha this boost, just this once." I felt the words coil around me like smoke, guilt as a weapon, love as currency. She was good at this, always had been. "It's not about the paper, sweetheart," she added softly. "It's about what's right in our hearts." That last line nearly made me laugh. In our hearts, the same hearts that pushed me aside like a mistake. Clive stepped in then, holding a framed photo, one of me, Azure, and Grandpa, taken years ago in the garden. We were smiling then, real smiles. He placed it on the side table like a prop in a courtroom. "Your mother said it was better this way," he murmured. "So I signed." I blinked. "You didn't read it?" Clive's face shifted, uneasy. "No. Sierra handles these things." That was it. No apology, no defense, just the casual neglect of someone who had once promised to protect me. It wasn't hatred that cut deepest, it was dismissal, the kind that tells you you don't matter enough to hurt deliberately. Azure squeezed my hand. I looked down at her. She didn't understand all the layers yet, but she understood enough that she was watching her mother be slowly erased. Then Calantha entered, late and radiant as ever. She floated into the room like a socialite returning from Paris. She didn't even glance at me. Instead, she kissed Kiara on the cheek and whispered something in her ear. Their body language was effortless, rehearsed. No one else made eye contact. Even the guests, whoever they were, family friends, maybe distant cousins, avoided my gaze. We sat through an agonizing hour of forced conversation, weather, Azure's school, new pumpkin bread recipes, all while the real matter, the betrayal, hovered like a ghost in the room. Eventually, I stood. "I'll see Azure home," I said softly. No one protested. No one said goodbye. As I walked down the hall, I passed family portraits, and I realized, somewhere along the years, my face had been erased from the walls. The drive back was quiet. Leaves fluttered across the windshield, rustling in the wind like whispers of things unsaid. Azure finally spoke, her voice small. "Mom, they made it hurt." I gripped the wheel tighter. "I know, baby." She hesitated. "Why did they do that?" I thought carefully before replying. "Because sometimes blood lies." I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila folder. Inside were scanned copies of every will, every email thread, every voicemail I'd saved. I had documentation, evidence, truth. I opened the voice memo app on my phone and pressed record. They think they can bury me with lies. Today, I begin to dig myself out. As we drove away, I glanced into the rearview mirror. The Harper estate stood quiet and unmoving in the distance, a monument to everything I was no longer willing to tolerate. I placed the folder gently in the passenger seat, and on top of it, I set the printed title page, "They Think I Won't Fight." But they were wrong. Dawn crept gently through the gauzy curtains of our hotel room, its pale gold light softening the sharp edges of the day I had been dreading and preparing for. I slipped out of bed slowly, careful not to wake Azure. Her breathing was steady, her long hair splayed across the pillow like strands of silk. For a moment, I paused and just watched her, the calm before the inevitable storm. Silently, I pulled on jeans and a thick sweater, then padded into the bathroom. The mirror was unforgiving. My eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep, but beneath the fatigue, something new had taken root. Resolve. No more avoiding, no more hoping they would come around. Today was the day I would strike first. Back in the room, I laid everything out across the small round table: documents, photocopies, receipts, voice memos, and most importantly, the original will, Grandpa's true will. I traced the familiar signature with my eyes, the ink slightly faded but clear. It was the version he signed before he fell mysteriously ill, before Sierra's influence took hold. The weight of what I was about to do settled in my chest like a stone, but backing down wasn't an option. I'd scanned every page, every note, backed them up in cloud storage under a folder I'd titled "Truth or Nothing." There would be no more hiding. This was either my line in the sand, or I might as well disappear entirely. As I sealed the envelope, a rustle came from behind. Azure had woken. She stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her voice still touched with sleep. "Mom, are you ready?" I looked at her, really looked. She was growing so fast, so wise for someone so young. I nodded slowly and held up the envelope. "Some things," I said quietly, "need to be said out loud." She patted over and gently touched the corner of the folder, nodding in silent solidarity. The afternoon dragged, the hours as heavy as the clouds rolling in above the highway. I drove while Azure sat quietly beside me, her sketchpad balanced on her knees. She didn't draw, just held it, maybe for comfort. The closer we got to Los Gatos, the more my stomach twisted. By the time we pulled up to the Harper estate, the sky was bruised with gray. The house stood as stately as ever, white columns, manicured lawns, the grand facade of wealth and pride. But behind its windows, I knew secrets simmered. The door opened before we knocked. Sierra greeted us with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore a cream sweater set and pearls, a picture of poised hospitality, but her tension showed in the way she clutched her hands. Clive stood beside her, expression unreadable. Behind them, Calantha leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Come in," Sierra said smoothly. "We've prepared lunch." We were ushered into the dining room. It was a picture from a lifestyle magazine: white linen tablecloth, silver cutlery, crystal glasses gleaming. The scent of roast turkey, spiced stuffing, and warm apple pie filled the air. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt staged. A trap disguised as a family reunion. We sat. Azure positioned herself beside me, quietly flipping open her sketch pad, though she didn't draw. Tiara cleared her throat and folded her hands on the table. "We're here to heal," she began, her voice controlled, "to move forward as a family." There was a pause. Then she gestured toward me. "Esther, would you please share what you brought?" I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the thick envelope. I placed it in the center of the table. The sound of paper brushing linen seemed deafening in the silence that followed. "This is what Grandpa wanted," I said quietly. "This is the original will. It names me as the sole heir." The words settled heavily in the room. Calantha pushed back her chair with a screech. "You're trying to humiliate us," she hissed. I looked at her calmly. "No. I'm refusing to be erased." Sierra's composure wavered. Her hand trembled as she reached for a water glass, the spoon in front of her rattling. Clive looked away, guilt etched in the slump of his shoulders. Calantha's eyes blazed with fury. "This changes everything," Clive muttered under his breath. "I thought we agreed to put the past behind us," Sierra said tightly. "No," I replied. "You asked me to forget it. That's not the same." Calantha shoved back her chair and stormed out. The door slammed behind her with a thunderous bang. I remained seated, unmoved. Slowly, I gathered the documents, tucking them back into my bag. "I can't stay in a house where the truth is hidden," I said, rising to my feet. Kiara stood as well, flustered. "You're choosing conflict over peace." "No," I answered, meeting her gaze. "I'm choosing truth over convenience." I turned and walked away, feeling Azure's hand slip into mine. We left through the front door without another word. The cold air outside felt bracing, even freeing. Back in the car, Azure looked over at me, her voice soft but steady. "You didn't shout once." I let out a small breath of a laugh. "I didn't need to," I said. "The truth speaks louder." We sat in silence for a while, the city lights starting to flicker to life as dusk settled in. Somewhere between the pain and the clarity, I felt something shift inside me. A first strike had been made, not out of vengeance, but out of conviction. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message preview lit up the screen. Thalia R., Law Group, let's talk strategy. I stared at it, then tapped it open. It was time to take this all the way. The door clicked shut behind me with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. I stood there for a moment, back against the wood, absorbing the silence of my apartment. Something had changed, something irreversible. The inaction, the passivity I had tolerated for so long, was over. The moment I turned the key, I knew I wasn't just shutting the door on my family. I was shutting the door on every version of myself that stayed quiet for the sake of peace. My phone buzzed again in my hand, relentless. Notifications lit up the screen like fireworks. Messages from coworkers, acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years, even strangers whose names I didn't recognize. I saw what they did. That was wrong. You deserved better than that. Stay strong. We're rooting for you. Then came the subject line that stopped my breath cold. From Thalia R., Law Group. We should talk. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the email. The name was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakably confident, direct, with no trace of pity. I opened it. She had seen the video. She believed I had a case. Her team specialized in estate disputes, coercion, and family financial abuse. Attached were initial terms, transparent fees, a tentative timeline, and a promise to level the playing field. I read it again. Then once more. And then, with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years, I hit reply. By morning, everything had changed. Azure, my daughter, had quietly uploaded the Thanksgiving footage from her phone. I hadn't even realized she'd recorded it. But there it was, me at the dinner table, voice trembling, being humiliated over and over, pressured to hand over my inheritance. Her caption was simple. "This is what family betrayal looks like. #Thanksgiving. Betrayal." Within hours, the clip had gone viral. 800,000 views. Then 1.2 million. Comments flooded in. This happened to me too. Stay strong, you're not alone. My mom did the same thing. I thought I was crazy. They gaslit you. Sue them. My DMs were overflowing. Most were supportive. A few warned me, careful, they won't go down easy. Then came the call that would change everything. Hi, this is Talia Rivera. I believe we spoke by email. I've reviewed your case. If you're ready, we don't wait. We act. Her voice was calm, but sharp like the edge of a blade. Every word felt purposeful. Let's draft it, she said. I've seen this kind of abuse before, and I don't lose sleep over upsetting entitled families. That afternoon, I met Talia in her downtown office. The space was sleek, modern, and unflinching. Floor-to-ceiling glass, no art, no distractions. Just a desk, 2 chairs, and a woman who made silence feel strategic. Talia was dressed in all black. Her eyes scanned every document I brought. Dad's original will, the revised estate paperwork, the guilt-ridden emails from Calantha, the voicemail from Clive. Each one told a story, and she saw right through them. You have grounds, she said. Multiple. I hesitated. I don't want to start a war. Talia leaned forward, tapping a folder with her pen. Then stop letting them win battles. She outlined our case methodically. Breach of inheritance agreement, emotional distress and coercion, fraudulent manipulation of estate documentation, intentional infliction of harm for financial gain. She handed me a folder titled Truth or Nothing. My name was embossed in bold. My hands trembled as I held it. I'm with you, she said. But once we begin, there's no going back. I know, I said quietly. And I'm ready. They demanded a talk, a final chance, they claimed, to resolve things amicably. I agreed, but with terms. Neutral ground, no shouting, no lies. We met in the same dining room where it all began. The table looked the same, the air did not. I brought 2 copies of our legal filing, one for Calantha, one for Clive. I placed them on the table before I even sat down. Calantha scoffed, already rolling her eyes. You needed the internet to grow a spine? I didn't rise to it. Instead, I slid the folders toward her with steady hands. She opened one, scanned the headings, and the smirk drained from her face. You're suing us? No, I said. I'm defending myself. There's a difference. Clive swallowed hard. Sierra looked confused, then terrified. You really want to go public with this? Clive asked. Family matters stay in the family. You made it public when you tried to break me in front of everyone, I replied. This isn't about revenge, it's about breathing without guilt. Calantha's composure shattered. She launched into a tirade, insults, twisted accusations, things I hadn't heard since childhood. Ungrateful. Jealous. Manipulative. But this time, no one echoed her rage. Sierra stayed quiet. Clive looked away. The spell had broken. Then the door opened. Thalia stepped inside with her briefcase in hand. From this point forward, she said, her voice carrying like a gavel, all correspondence will go through legal channels. You've been served. She handed them the official notice of intent. Calantha stood up, trembling. You think you can win? I don't think, Talia said smoothly. I know. I turned and walked out with Talia at my side. Outside, Azure was waiting on a bench, sketchpad on her knees, drawing quietly, her world unshaken. I reached for her hand, and together, we left without another word. As we drove away, Thalia flipped through her files, then muttered just loud enough for me to hear. Wait until they see what's in the bank records. The courtroom doors swung open with a metallic creak, letting in a gust of noise from the hallway. Camera shutters clicking, murmurs rising like a tide. I stepped forward into the blinding flashes, my daughter Azure's hand gripped tightly in mine. She walked beside me without hesitation, her small frame steady and upright. Despite everything, she stood tall, my anchor in a storm I hadn't asked for. The press was out in force. Reporters crowded behind yellow tape, cell phones and microphones aimed at us like weapons. A bold banner stretched across the courthouse lobby. Thanksgiving heir dispute goes legal. Their voices buzzed like flies, trying to catch a headline before we could even speak. Miss Harper, did your sister really forge your father's will? Is it true your family forced you out of the inheritance? I didn't answer. I didn't even flinch. I focused on the courtroom doors ahead, the faces of lawyers waiting inside, the judge's bench framed by the heavy wood panels. This was no longer a private betrayal. This was war in public view. Calantha stood with her attorney near the front. She met my gaze with an icy nod, more habit than respect. Kiara sat behind her, pale and visibly shaking. Clive, arms crossed and lips tight, avoided my eyes. Azure tugged gently on my hand and asked in a soft whisper, "Mom, are we going to win?" I crouched slightly so only she could hear. "We already did, sweetie." We stopped pretending. Inside the courtroom, everything quieted. The air felt pressed down, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Talia stood beside me, calm and composed as ever. Her briefcase clicked open, releasing a storm of organized evidence, folders, files, copies, and printouts. Each sheet was a shard of truth we'd pieced together over months. Bank statements, transfer logs, comparison signatures, we've got them all, she whispered. On the opposite side, Calantha's lawyer shuffled papers with a nervous energy. His eyes flicked constantly, toward us, toward the judge's bench, toward his client. Sierra fidgeted, her hands clasped so tight they turned red. Clive looked like a statue, frozen, unblinking. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. The judge entered, robes sweeping. The room rose, then sat again, the tension building like a held breath. Thalia stood, her voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, we begin with Exhibit A." She clicked a remote, and the screen came alive with documentation. This is a record of a $40,000 withdrawal from the estate account, initiated using Calantha's login credentials. The funds were directed into an account in Tiara's name. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Thalia continued without pause. Exhibit B reveals inconsistencies in the signature authorizations. A forensic analysis concludes that several of these signatures were forged. The patterns match those in archived legacy documents, altered by hand, traced from old forms. A collective gasp echoed behind us. Kiara paled to the point of translucence. Her eyes darted to Calantha, who stared straight ahead, lips pressed so tightly they nearly vanished. Clive's head dropped. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Harper, did you authorize these transfers?" I stood. "No, Your Honor. I never signed those documents. My name was used without my consent." Another hush fell. I could feel the momentum shifting. "It was to help the family," Calantha burst out. "We had debts. Family doesn't embezzle," Talia interrupted, her voice firm but composed. "Family doesn't forge wills and signatures. That's not love. That's theft." And in that moment, the weight I had carried, years of doubt, shame, manipulation, shifted onto their shoulders. The judge leaned back, voice low. "Would both parties consider a settlement before I render a decision?" Calantha's lawyer whispered furiously into her ear, urging damage control. But I stood. "No, Your Honor." I turned and looked straight at my sister. "They took more than money. They took my dignity. They took my peace. They poisoned my daughter's trust. That's not something you settle with a check." I faced the gallery, catching Azure's wide eyes peeking between spectators. I walked toward her, past the lawyers, past the cameras. Kneeling beside her, I whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "You don't have to stay silent just to be loved." Her tiny arms wrapped around my neck, and we stood together, her head against my shoulder. Then we turned and walked out. I didn't wait for the ruling. I didn't need the law to tell me I was finally free. Reporters rushed toward us as the doors swung open behind us. Microphones were thrust forward, flashes blinding. "Miss Harper, how do you feel?" Talia gently placed a hand on my shoulder, offering to shield me, but I stepped forward and spoke. This was never about inheritance. It was about dignity, about not being erased in silence. Behind the press line, people were already watching the hearing unfold online. Phones lit up with reactions. Social media buzzed. #HarperTrial trended within the hour. As Azure and I reached the car, she climbed in first, quiet, her notepad still in her lap. A pencil was tucked behind her ear, her thoughts likely spinning faster than I could imagine. I closed the door, exhaled, and started the ignition. The city lights shimmered through the windshield. Traffic rolled by like the world hadn't just cracked open. A soft ding interrupted the quiet. A new email. I tapped the screen. The subject line read, "She doesn't deserve the truth." Attached was a video. I hit play. It was Calantha, recorded secretly, her voice sharp with disdain. "She'll never know what really happened. She doesn't deserve the truth." The phone slipped slightly in my hand. A chill rippled through me, but beneath the anxiety, a strange calm settled. The collapse wasn't over. It had only just begun. The soft hum of the car filled the silence as night swallowed the horizon. Streetlights blurred past, streaking gold against the windows. Azure had fallen asleep beside me, her head tilted gently toward the glass, lips slightly parted in slumber. Her sketchbook rested on her lap, her arms wrapped around it like a shield. Her hair, loose and unbrushed, curtained her face, hiding the exhaustion she never said aloud. I pulled into the hotel parking lot and cut the engine. A heavy stillness fell, wrapping around me like fog. I didn't move, not even to breathe deeply. The glow of my phone screen lit up the interior of the car with an eerie light. My thumb hovered over the video that Talia had sent me. My hands were damp with sweat. My stomach coiled tight. The video loaded without ceremony. No intro, no build-up. Just Calantha, hair messy and laughter too loud, sitting at a bar with two unfamiliar women. Her eyeliner smudged beneath glazed eyes. The audio wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. "Esther?" she scoffed, lifting her glass. "Oh, please, she's a fluke. Dad didn't even want a third kid." The others laughed. Calantha grinned wider. "I only tolerated her to get the trust fund. Manipulating her was easy." She raised her glass, voice laced with cruelty. "To manipulation, it works every time." The clip ended abruptly. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. I stared at the black screen. For a long time, I didn't feel anything but a strange, quiet numbness. I had spent years convincing myself that maybe I had imagined things, that perhaps I was too sensitive, that maybe I hadn't tried hard enough to be part of the family. This was confirmation, vile, cold, and clear. And yet, there was no shock, only a kind of release. The tension in my chest unwound like a knotted rope finally coming loose. Upstairs, in the hotel room, I found Azure curled up on the bed, the same sketchbook clutched to her chest. She stirred as I tucked her in, murmuring softly but never waking. I peeked at the page. Two stick figures stood beneath a tree, each holding umbrellas, shielding one another from a drawn storm. This time, I wasn't alone in the picture. I sat in the corner with my phone and sent a text to Thalia. "Call me. Urgent." She rang back within minutes. Her voice was steady, clipped, like she already knew I wasn't calling for small talk. "You found something?" she asked. "I have a confession," I whispered. "Not mine, theirs." An hour later, she was at the hotel, laptop open before she even sat down. We watched the clip together without speaking. When it ended, she stared at the frozen screen, then glanced at me. "This was 2 months before the lawsuit?" "Yes," she typed furiously. "We'll check metadata, timestamps, everything." "But this is damning." By the next morning, the world had seen it. News sites ran the footage. Headlines screamed betrayal. Social media erupted. Cold-hearted sister exposed. Years of curated public image shattered in hours. Her husband filed for divorce. Screenshots of leaked legal documents made their rounds. Community boards she once chaired released public statements of disassociation. Her name trended, for all the wrong reasons, but I didn't feel triumphant. As I stood at the hotel window, watching the sun rise through a web of clouds, I felt like something heavy was lifting, like gravity had eased, just enough for me to stand taller. I wasn't smiling, but I wasn't hiding anymore. Later that afternoon, Azure tiptoed to my desk. "Mom," she said shyly, "people at school are saying you're brave." I smiled and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "It's not bravery, sweetheart. It's just truth." She looked thoughtful. Is it over now? Almost, I said. But we're not going to celebrate someone else's downfall. We're just going to move forward. Another call came from Talia. Her voice was lower this time. Second clip, older. You should sit down. I watched alone. Grainy footage played. Our old living room. The wallpaper faded and peeling. My mother's voice, low, almost a whisper, speaking to Clive. I never wanted Esther, she said. She was an accident. Calantha deserves everything. The screen didn't blur, but my vision did. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, the weight of her words settling into a space already worn hollow. Azure padded in quietly, holding another drawing. A house, simple lines, curved roof, but with no doors. What do you think this means? She asked. I took a shaky breath and pulled her into my lap. It's proof, I said, but it doesn't hurt like it used to. That night, I deleted both videos. My thumb hovered before I pressed erase. It felt like severing a rope that had been tied around my throat for years. Later, I sat at the small hotel desk, opening a blank document. It was time to end this my way. I didn't want to be like them. I didn't want revenge. I only wanted dignity, justice. I wrote clearly and calmly, no criminal charges, only civil repayment and a public apology. I wanted closure, not chaos. I read the letter aloud. My voice didn't shake. Azure sat cross-legged on the bed, listening intently. When I finished, she nodded slowly, thoughtfully, as if she understood more than she should at her age. Weeks later, at her school's essay contest, she stood before an auditorium packed with students and parents. She read from a paper in her small hands. My mom taught me that dignity doesn't yell, it stands. Applause echoed through the hall. She smiled as she took her ribbon. We packed slowly that night. There was no rush anymore, no fleeing, only moving on. Before leaving, I checked the mailbox one last time. Inside was a single postcard. No return address, just one sentence, handwritten in familiar loops and slants. Maybe someday you'll see I tried. I turned it over. No signature. But I knew the handwriting. Sierra. I stared at it for a long time. Azure's voice called from inside. Mom, are we leaving? I slid the postcard into my coat pocket and closed the mailbox gently. Yes, I said softly. We're leaving. I folded the postcard and tucked it into my jacket pocket, letting its corners press gently against my chest. Azure reached for my sleeve, her small hand curling around the fabric as if to anchor me to this moment. The morning sun poured through the thinning trees, casting golden shadows across the road as we drove south, away from the house, away from the years of silence, control, and pain. Every mile behind us felt like a piece of the past falling away, drifting like the leaves that scattered across the highway. We arrived in Asheville by late afternoon. The mountains rose around us like ancient guardians, their slopes brushed with amber and rust. Autumn had made its home here. The house we pulled up to was modest, a pale gray two-story with creaky steps and an overgrown yard. But when I turned the key and opened the door, something shifted inside me. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. It was possibility. The movers brought in box after box, but it was the one labeled Azure's room that made her stop. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, pulling out a stuffed rabbit and a faded drawing of a tree. She looked up at me. Can we stay here forever? She asked, her voice small but sure. I bent down and hugged her tightly. That's the plan, I whispered. For the first time in so long, there was no tension hiding in the walls, no glances over our shoulders, just sunlight warming the hardwood floors and the scent of cinnamon from the candles we lit. Azure danced barefoot across the living room, wrapping herself in a blanket and humming a tune she made up on the spot. I watched her from the doorway, and I didn't see a battlefield. I saw a home. Not long after settling in, I started the Elliot Harper Scholarship Fund. Grandpa's name deserved more than whispers. It felt right to honor him by helping those who had been discarded by the very people who were supposed to protect them. The local newspaper wrote a piece about it, the headline bold, Heritage betrayed, strength reclaimed. At a small community college event, I stood behind a podium and faced a crowd of quiet faces, some curious, others clearly survivors too. Forgiveness, I said slowly, isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over poison. The room didn't erupt. There was no dramatic applause, but when Azure's teacher approached me afterwards and said, they leaned in to hear every word, I knew the words had landed. They didn't just echo, they mattered. One evening, I found a drawing at the foot of my bed. It was simple, drawn in crayon, a 2-story house that looked like ours, a small yard, and a sign in a child's handwriting, "No one hurts Mom here." I held it in my hands, heart twisting in ways I couldn't prepare for. My thoughts traveled backward to a memory long buried. I saw myself as an infant in Sierra's arms. She held me stiffly, her face unreadable, her lips barely brushing my forehead. I heard her whisper in that memory, quiet, fractured, "I don't know how to love you." I framed Azure's drawing that night, hung it in the hallway like a small declaration. A voice inside me murmured, maybe she didn't know how. But I do. And that's enough, for both of us. The pain didn't disappear, but it softened into something gentler, something survivable. Weeks later, in town, I spotted Calantha behind the counter of a small independent bookstore. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her face thinner than I remembered. She looked up briefly, and I saw the flicker of recognition, followed quickly by averted eyes. A customer made a passing comment. "You look like someone from that inheritance story." Calantha's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. Not long after, an article ran. Former socialite withdraws lawsuit, issues apology. A few days later, I received a letter. Plain envelope. Typed words. "I lost everything. Maybe I deserved to, but Azure was never part of my war. Tell her I'm sorry." I read it once, then again. My chest clenched, not from anger, but from the quiet collapse of a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I didn't feel victorious. I felt released. One Saturday, Azure and I took a drive. She was quiet, her eyes watching the scenery blur by as we approached the town we had left behind. The old house stood there, unchanged in its bones, but tired now, weather-worn. Signs in the windows read, "For sale." No cars in the driveway, no flowers in the garden, just silence. I parked across the street and stepped out. The wind carried a dry leaf across my shoes. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the stillness. I came here once thinking I owed them everything, but now I owe myself peace. I didn't knock. I didn't walk up the steps. I simply turned around, climbed back into the car, and drove away. A few weeks later, Azure began middle school. One evening, we sat in the auditorium during awards night. She stood at the podium, her voice clear and confident, reading an essay she had written titled, "My Mom Fought Quietly, but Loud Enough to Save Me." The room rose in applause, a sea of people on their feet. I stayed in the back row, tears falling silently. Afterwards, a woman approached me. She looked tired but strong, like someone who had weathered many storms. "Your story saved me," she said, her voice cracking. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We're stronger than they ever imagined," I said. Azure found me and looped her arm through mine as we walked out under the stars. "Mom," she said, "I believe in us." I looked down at her, heart full in a way I had never known before. "So do I replied. The future was still uncertain. Healing was not a destination. It was a road, one we would walk for the rest of our lives. But for the first time, we were walking it together, and we were walking it in light. Sometimes, the deepest scars come not from strangers, but from those who share your last name. Esther's story reminds us that standing up for the truth, no matter how quiet or painful, is still a victory. What would you do if your own family treated loyalty like currency? If this story moved you, drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because more stories of courage, healing, and hard truths are coming your way.